Welcome in part 2 of The Extreme Christian. If you haven't seen part 1, please check that out first, because it's important to have all this in order in order to get the message the correct way. So we're working towards finding out, understanding what is the extreme Christian, how can we be one. So to summarize what we determined in part 1, at least to give the definition that I gave at the end, the extreme Christian is a follower of Christ who lives by faith and mortifies the deeds of the flesh. He or she lives in this world but abhors its moral value system. The extreme Christian avoids all forms of worldliness, and in doing so, he or she goes to the far end, uncompromising. So that's the definition. Now, how can we be such a Christian? We're getting closer, but again I have to address first something else before we can get to it, and that is the enemy. That is the enemy. Before we can try to determine how we ought to live, we must know about this important factor. The enemy is introduced in the Bible to us as the serpent. And this is in Genesis 3 verse 1, and it says there that he is more subtle than any other beast. Now the word subtle there means shrewd. He's not rude or blunt, but he's sly and deceives in a subtle way. Now, Revelation 12 verse 9 makes very clear who this serpent is. The great dragon, the old serpent, called the devil and Satan, which deceives the whole world. So it's clear he is a deceiver. He's a liar. Jesus calls him the father of lies. And Paul writes that we know the devices of the devil to the Corinthians in 2 Corinthians 2 verse 11. Now the question is, do we indeed know his devices? We should know. We are at war, and knowing the devices, the plans, the schemes of the enemy is vital. If you know that, then you know how to set up your defenses and maybe even execute a counter-offense. So especially in these last days, it's more important than ever that we recognize the modus operandi of the devil. Unfortunately, many Christians don't. And they take the bait, hook, line and sinker, as they say. Let's look at some tactics that he plays out, especially in these last days. And I keep mentioning this, last days. This is what it's actually all about. This is why this message, the extreme Christian, is, as I said in an introductory video, the most important message because of the timing. We need this information now. We are reaching the final battle in this war, and decision day is nearing. Therefore, we must understand where we are and what's coming at us. Otherwise, we will lose individually. In the end, of course, we know who will prevail. But let's look at some of the tactics that the devil uses in these last days. In 1965, Paul Harvey broadcasted a radio message that was meant as a warning to America. But it turned out to be very prophetic. Not only for America, but for the whole world. And I will read an excerpt of it. So this is not a complete broadcast, but I just highlight some of the important things in this context. If I were the devil, if I were the prince of darkness, I'd want to engulf the whole world in darkness. I'd subvert the churches first. I'd begin with a campaign of whispers, With the wisdom of a serpent, I would whisper to you as I whispered to Eve, do as you please. To the young, I would whisper that the Bible is a myth. I would confide that what is bad is good and what is good is square. I'd threaten TV with dirtier movies. I'd peddle narcotics to whom I could. If I were the devil, I'd soon have families at war with themselves, churches at war with themselves, and nations at war with themselves. And with promises of higher ratings, I'd have mesmerizing media fanning the flames. If I were the devil, I would encourage schools to refine young intellects, but neglect to discipline emotions. Just let those run wild. Within a decade, I'd have prisons overflowing. I'd have judges promoting pornography. I soon could evict God from the courthouse, then from the schoolhouse, and then from the House of Congress. And in his own churches, I would substitute psychology for religion and defy science. I would lure priests and pastors into misusing boys and girls and church money. If I were the devil, I'd take from those who have and give to those who want until I had killed the incentive of the ambitious. I would convince the young that what you see on the TV is the way to be. And thus I could undress you in public and I could lure you into bed with diseases for which there is no cure. As said, it's an excerpt of the broadcast, and this was in 1965, and this has been the way since and continuing now. And of course, there where he mentions TV, we could also fill in internet nowadays. And this medium, the internet, is literally available 24/7 now. And so you see that the devil has continued to do this and stepped up the pace of it. And a major way to convey Satan's evil message is through music. Let's not forget that Lucifer was the heavenly choir master before his fall. It is his field of expertise. And he finds good disciples in musicians. Bob Dylan wrote in 1964 the song "The Times They Are A-Changing." And part of the lyrics of that song give away the agenda in a very blatant way. And I quote from this song, "The Times They Are A-Changing," 1964 by Bob Dylan. It says, "Come, mothers and fathers throughout the land, and don't criticize what you can't understand. Your sons and daughters are beyond your command." Your sons and daughters are beyond your command. This was the case when the music industry exploded and mesmerized the youth from the early 60s of the last century on. And it continues to do so today, as you see that much of the youth is plugged into music large parts of the day, and they know most of the lyrics by heart, not understanding that they're being brainwashed. Technology has made the communication of this evil message and the brainwashing of the populace more effective than ever. And our dependency of this technology is ever increasing as it is utilized in every area of our lives. And people voluntarily step into this digital cage that will bring them to the exact point that the Bible has foretold, Satan's endgame. And it is ever so close. It is so important that we understand this. Technology did not just happen because there were some smart people. In a video a few years ago called New Smartphones, a Quantum Leap, I will leave the link for that. It's, by the way, still a featured video on the website. In this video I show that the major inventors of the past 200 years, let's say, that led to the Industrial Revolution. The ones that invented steam engine, electricity, light, telegraph, all these things, they were all into occultism and sometimes even Satanism. They were all inspired by Satan to come to their inventions. This, of course, we benefit from this in many ways. Even this broadcast is made possible through technology. But Satan is not interested in that. He's not interested that we have light when it gets dark in the evening. He has pushed man to develop these things because he needs it in his end game, which we find in Revelation 19, and the things preceding that, which we find in Revelation 13. That is why we have this technology, and that is why it's so prevalent in our lives. We must understand this. This is very important. Now, in 2010, the Canadian filmmaker Matt Anderson made a video that was dubbed as a training video for IllumiCorp. Now, allegedly it was a parody or it was meant for a computer game. It's not quite clear, but like Paul Harvey's broadcast, it turns out to be extremely prophetic. And here is an excerpt of the part that speaks about technology. And I quote, "Technology such as the internet, GPS and RFID chips are pillars of the invisible prison we are erecting around the people. Within the decade, we will have real ID cards that contain criminal records and private information and are linked to federal databases. Cell phones will tell us where each individual lives, linked to the same database. Through intelligence agencies and Homeland Security, and I add here, and artificial intelligence, we will monitor individuals who oppose the Great Plan and remove them from the grid. Quickly, the population will learn that they have a choice. Support the system and benefit from its luxuries, or reject it and lose access to the grid." So this shows or describes a grim picture of what this technology actually is. It is an invisible prison, he calls it. And indeed it is. I have added in there AI, artificial intelligence, because the amount of information that is being processed is so immense that this cannot be done by human beings. And so artificial intelligence is actually performing these tasks, and this makes it possible to create a almost perfect control grid that is real-time monitoring all of mankind. Now, God warned us through His Word, yet Christians and their children are fully immersed in this digital technological world, allowing themselves to be set up for a great deception and stepping into a trap from which escape is close to impossible. I really want you to rethink what I just said and let it sink in. God warned us through His Word, yet Christians and their children are fully immersed in this digital technological world, allowing themselves to be set up for a great deception and stepping into a trap from which escape is close to impossible. I ask again, are we really not ignorant of Satan's devices? And ask yourself this question. Let's move to the extreme Christian. Knowing all this, where do we stand? What do we do? As I said, and I want to repeat again because you have to realize this. Most Christians are already fully immersed in this world. They have embraced much of what it offers. And it is like sinking sand, sucking you in ever deeper. And most do not realize that we are at war, and that these are Satan's weapons, that they themselves allow to be deployed against them. When and where do you begin to say no? Well, the point is that if you haven't said no already, then it's way overdue. Remember, compromise is the beginning of failure. Look at Christians, look at yourself. How do you clothe yourself? What language do you use? How is the use of your makeup, your hairstyle? What music do you listen to, and what music do you like? Which devices do you use? Look at the behavior of Christians in the church. For example, do they read or use a physical Bible or a smartphone? Are they led by the Holy Spirit or by Google? And forgive me if I maybe sound ridiculous, but this is the reality that we live in. And if we think that all these things are okay and can be combined with our faith, then we are fooling ourselves. Where we are, at the end of the age, ever more things are vehicles used by Satan to tighten his grip on this world for his coming reign. Music, technology, clothing, everything we see around us and we hear, it's used by him. A Christian living 2000 years ago, generally speaking, would have less conflicts with society around him than a Christian today. He would have conflicts with certain people and with authorities, but with the world around him, way less than today. The reason being is that society has increasingly turned against biblical values, against God. So from the perspective of the world, Christians today are much more extreme than 2000 years ago. Notice what I say, from the perspective of the world. Christians are way more extreme now than they were 2000 years ago. But if fellow Christians call you extreme, what does that mean? How much have they compromised? Is a question. I will see you gladly in part 3 to bring all this together and deduct from this how we ought to live. What do we need to do? What do we need to change? Amen.